In ancient times, Croesus, the last king of Lydia, was believed to be the richest king in the world. According to legend, it took 70 camels to transport the keys to his treasure chambers. But when the Persians invaded, neither his offerings to the gods nor his attempted alliances with the Greeks could save his kingdom. Croesus vanished from the surface of the earth along with his treasure. Some 2,500 years later, in 1970, a mysterious phone call was made that revived the ancient legend.
I've been a journalist since 1961. One day I was working in the newsroom and the phone rang. A man said to me in English, "My name is Peter Hopkirk. I'm a British journalist. I'm searching for a treasure that was stolen from Turkey and brought to New York's Metropolitan Museum of Art."
In New York, the Metropolitan Museum of Art had allegedly purchased a treasure in secret in the late 1960s, and it was soon going to be put on display. According to the British reporter, this would include jewelry and about 100 gold pieces, which had been found near Uşak in Turkey.
I was intrigued that a British journalist knew so much about the theft of a Turkish treasure. I was a local and knew nothing about it.
If one of the greatest museums in the world had purchased Anatolian artifacts, then the Turkish government would surely be aware.
The Turkish government knew illegal excavations had taken place in the 1960s. We had no idea how many works had been stolen from our lands during that time, but we did know that numerous Lydian artifacts had made their way to many museums.
I told the minister what the British journalist had told me.
A few days later, the British reporter published an article in the Sunday Times titled, "Turks Claim Croesus Gold Held in U.S. Museum."
We didn't even know such a treasure existed. It was Hopkirk who called it Croesus treasure. He's the one who gave it a name.
The Englishman connected the treasury to the legendary Croesus, the last king of Lydia. But no one had ever seen proof of his treasure. Had it been stolen over the centuries? Or was it resting intact somewhere in a burial mound?
Peter Hopkirk put things in motion, so I began to look into it closely.
When he began work on the case, Ozgen Akar never expected he would uncover one of the world's biggest artifact trafficking scandals. Located between Ankara and Izmir, Uşak is a city in southwest Anatolia. The history of this Turkish region goes back over 3,000 years and covers many different civilizations. The Lydian civilization was one of them and had dominated Western Asia Minor for 1,000 years. Ozgen Akar believed Uşak was where it all began. If a treasure had been discovered near there, the locals should be able to help him.
He traveled several times to Uşak. He interviewed the villagers. He also got and met with the museum director then, and he worked really hard on it by his travels and by his interviews, I would say.
The Turkish journalist met the director of the Uşak Museum of Archaeology, Kazim Akbikoglu.
Kazim Akbikoglu was an archaeologist, and he was really invested in his work. He loved what he did. He was highly experienced in his field.
Kazim took Ozgen to Gur, a village a few kilometers from Uşak, so he could interview the local villagers. Back then, illegal excavations by locals in the countryside were commonplace.
In Turkey, there are several legends of finding gold and becoming rich. It's like the gold hunt in the 60s in the US, you know. In 1960s, The idea of getting rich was in the minds of the villagers in Uşak, in Güre.
Ozgen's investigation proved worthwhile, and he gathered precious clues from the local villagers.
People quickly started coming here. They came from Izmir and Bursa.
We don't know. We don't know where they went.
They went out at 6 a.m. and came back at 3 p.m.
There are leaves of gold in the ground as big as my hand. Some smaller, some bigger. Gold sheets. I took one and I asked my uncle what it was. I didn't know what it was worth. He looked at it and he told me it was gold. He asked me where I found it. I told him the ground was full of it.
The villagers would bring them back and weigh them on the grocer's scales.
In 1955, a shepherd was grazing his sheep in the valley. He had a stick in his hand, and the ground was soft from the rain. He planted his stick in the ground, and when he pulled it up, there was a leaf of gold stuck to it. What were those leaves of gold? Well, when a noble died, be it a man or a woman, they would place these golden leaves over their eyes like this. That's how it all started.
In Turkey, no one had mentioned a recently discovered treasure. Ozgen returned to the region on several occasions. Over the years, he befriended the locals and earned their trust. One day, in a cafe, a man approached him and asked to speak to him in private. He told him he knew a certain Kamal who had entered a burial mound. Ozgen needed more information from the Americans, particularly from the Metropolitan Museum of Art. By publishing his article, the British journalist had made waves, but he had no proof. What was his story based on?
The Metropolitan Museum of Art has always been considered one of the greatest museums on earth. It contains works from all over the world.
Metropolitan is, of course, a big cultural institution, and it's valuable for the art world. This is for sure.
When I went to the Met for the first time, the artifacts were not on display. So I met with a number of people who were part of the institution. They said they didn't have anything and tried to stop me from investigating.
In 1967, Thomas Hoving, the Met's former chief curator, became its director. Under his leadership, the museum was modernized and transformed. The collections grew as the museum sought out blockbuster works that would attract a new kind of visitor. In 10 years, Hoving's focus shifted to acquiring new, world-renowned works by selling off less prestigious or duplicate works from the museum's collection.
They consider themselves as an encyclopedic museum. Maybe this is where all the problems start, because when you have such an ambition, then you don't that much care the provenance of the objects that you have in your collection.
For the director of museum of the time was not so important to go deeply in the provenance. Before the UNESCO 1917 convention, everything was, I won't say free, but for sure there was not this awareness as today.
In their acquisition frenzy, the directors had grown the museum's collection to more than 20 times what it was when it opened in 1870. The Met owned over 2 million works between 17 different conservation departments. Since it's impossible to display everything at once, many of the works are kept in storage facilities.
Many museums have numerous pieces in storage that have yet to be exhibited. You could start an entirely new museum with these works alone. That's how many there are. The Metropolitan is one of those museums.
Ozgen tapped into his network in New York. He contacted an archaeologist friend who had access to the museum. He asked her to check the Met's warehouses to see if they had any Asia Minor treasures in storage.
She went in the museum and called someone while I waited outside. About 20 minutes later, she came out with 5 photos in her hand. These 5 photos showed the treasure. These 5 photos were concrete evidence that the museum was holding several items.
The objects photographed strangely resembled Lydian artifacts and corroborated the testimonies Ozgen had gathered in the villages. It turned out that Hopkirk had been right.
In ancient times, it was said that whenever a king would seize new territory, tomb raiders had already beaten him to it. This is a big cemetery that we call Bin Tepe, near Sardis, the ancient capital of the former kingdom of Lydia. In this region, there are, by our count, around 115 burial mounds, or tumuli. These tumuli are the tombs of kings, their families, and their dynasty.
Here in Turkey, there are over 50,000 tumuli. There are more ancient Greek cities than in Greece, and there are more ancient Roman cities than in Italy. That means these lands where we live have been home to the world's most important civilizations after Egypt.
Everyone knows the pyramids of Egypt. Here we have tumuli that are almost the same size.
Around 1200 BC, the Hittite Empire was in decline. A number of local powers emerged in Anatolia. Among them was the Kingdom of Lydia and its capital, Sardis. Rich in precious minerals, its fertile lands helped it dominate Western Anatolia. 3 dynasties succeeded one another at the head of the kingdom. King Croesus was the last king of these territories in 560 BC.
Herodotus, and later some other historical sources, described Croesus as an amenable, benevolent, and pious man. He was said to be very generous, offering his help to all. The people he governed had a deep appreciation for him. He was loved because Croesus brought his people a certain prosperity. One of his gifts was that he improved their process for refining gold. That's ultimately what made Croesus and Lydia rich.
Croesus is mentioned in a number of ancient texts. The expression, "as rich as Croesus," is used all over the world. His vast fortune left a mark on history, and for a long time, many explorers searched for his tomb. The gold-bearing river sand helped the Lydian king amass a considerable fortune. He developed new techniques to mine the rivers of the region, which allowed him to extract gold flakes from the sands of the Pactolus River, bordering the city of Sardis.
The gold was not pure. It was mixed with other materials, but Croesus knew how to separate them. Croesus was the first person in history to establish a monetary system similar to our current system.
Under Croesus's reign, Lydia underwent a spectacular expansion. The kingdom became an empire that spread over Western Asia Minor. After conquering nearby territories, Croesus found himself up against Persia, which was gaining ground in the west. Border conflicts broke out. The empires fought over the land, and Croesus's neighbors coveted his wealth. Cyrus the Great, the Achaemenid king, led a siege against Sardis, and in 546 BC, the Persians seized control of Lydia and took Croesus captive.
When Sardis fell into Persian hands, Croesus was captured and brought before Cyrus the Great. As punishment, and in an offering to the gods, the king bound Croesus to a stake to burn him.
According to Herodotus, after being exiled to Ecbatana near Babylon, Cyrus the Great condemned Croesus to be burned at the stake. In 546 BC, after a 14-year reign, Croesus, his kingdom, and his fortune vanished from the face of the earth. There was no trace of his tomb, unlike his fathers and grandfathers, who have tumuli over 70 meters tall in the Bin Tepe Valley. Croesus just disappeared, along with his treasure. In New York City, the Met gave no information about the provenance of the photographed objects. Özgen was convinced that the photos were of artifacts found in ancient Lydia, objects taken from the tombs.
The only thing we're trying to prove is that this treasure came from Anatolia, and that these are Lydian artifacts.
They needed to find the tomb raiders. They had to have their confessions. It was the key to recovering the treasure. Özgen and Kazim returned to Gur, searching for the men who could have entered the tomb.
There were 6 pillagers. Only one of the 6 is alive today.
I was 23 when I went to Toptepe. My neighbor, Ahmed Bulbul, came to me and said, Kemal, Haylaz Hill is actually a burial mound. I asked him what he meant, and he said it was a burial mound, like the mounds in Salili at Bintepe. He took us there. We left from here, and it was just as he had said. It was a burial mound. That's where everything started.
The 2 villagers identified 3 tumuli near their village: Toptepe, İkiztepe, and Aktepe. The hills seemed man-made.
These graves, known as tumuli, first appeared in Anatolia in the Iron Age. All these hills are man-made. The dirt was brought here for the grave, and the men built these mounds manually. Once the tomb was ready, the body of the deceased was brought over in a procession. The body was placed on a decorated carrier that moved slowly. Murals painted along the ceremonial walkways and funeral chambers reveal that the processions were sad and calm.
The tumuli were made by Lydians or other Anatolian civilizations in order to protect the grave and keep the smugglers away. Smugglers were all around the world since the beginning of the history. I mean, it's not the problem of the age. So they tried to find an easy way to enter.
The 6 men from Gur needed to find a way inside the burial mound.
They started digging, and they found this entrance, which is how they got inside.
We used candles for light. We passed the stones from hand to hand. They weren't big, they were very easy to carry. They were about the size of a watermelon. And as we were removing, we saw something. It was the door.
We cleared this part and caught sight of the stone over us. We had reached the surface of this spot. We dug, broke in here, and that's where we got. This was filled with the stones you see there. That's when we saw there was a door here. We broke it open and then cleared out this part.
They found the pre-grave room at the beginning. So this is an empty fake room.
When the tumuli were built, the people of Lydia created different access points to confuse potential tomb raiders. The İkiztepe tumulus had 2 entrances and was made up of 2 rooms. In Aktepe, the burial chamber was hidden behind a decoy chamber and blocked with a door the tomb raiders couldn't open with their existing tools.
We went to see the village blacksmith and we explained everything to him. He had forging hammers and tools. We took those and we went back. We used the tools to start digging on one side. We broke a side so we could make a bigger hole. The door had metal and lead locks.
One of them, with some explosives, opened the gate to the other main room.
We tried to move the door and one of the sides shifted. We dug until it gave way. We shone a light inside and there was gold and silver sparkling. I swear it looked like electricity.
İnan ki böyle bak.
The first thing we saw inside the chamber was a table like that, about 1 meter high.
There's a cline, and on top of it, there was a skeleton which was in dust.
It was covered in dust and some hair that hadn't rotted.
The funeral chamber contained objects of inestimable value. The villagers removed coins, necklaces, pendants, bracelets, and other golden jewelry, bronze utensils with carved animal heads, and silver vases that featured carved human forms and battle scenes.
We found a gold piece shaped like a creature with a horse's head and a fishtail.
A small piece that was one of a kind, a gold brooch of a hippocampus. There were more than 300 pieces of gold, bronze, silver, agate, and turquoise. This represented an extraordinary historical treasure trove.
They couldn't believe in their eyes that there were these all silver and gold objects surrounded the room.
Someone saw us there and came back to the village and told everyone we went inside the hill. Everyone in the village knew. By the time we got to the river, all the villagers were waiting for us and started screaming when they saw us coming. We had hidden everything in our boots, but no one knew. We took everything unbeknownst to them.
Back at the village, Kemal, Ahmed Bulbul, and the others now possessed what Peter Hopkirk would later refer to as Croesus's gold. But the villagers had no clue how valuable their treasure was.
They had found these antique objects, but they didn't realize it was the Lydian Hoard, and they didn't know how valuable it truly was. Villagers often sold them to intermediaries who would siphon them off overseas. They sold them at prices that seemed high to them, but which were completely undervalued given the importance of these objects.
A buyer came to the village. He put a magnifying glass over his eye, looked at one of the pieces, then put it down. He looked at me and put money down. He looked at me again and put more money down. I signaled for him to stop, and he stopped. That's how he paid me. I couldn't believe it was worth that much money. And that's how we were able to buy this house for 900 euros. I also bought a field with what I had left over.
There was a person from Afyon who was the first buyer and who sold the artifacts to the second one, who was located in Izmir. And he took them to Istanbul, to Kapalı Çarşı.
The intermediary then sold it to someone named Klejman. He's the one who took it to the United States.
So there are generally 2 or 3 phases of intermediaries.
When the object arrived in front of the museum, in front of the director, with a proposal to be bought by them, normally the middleman already provided the fake document of provenance.
Before getting to the Klejman Gallery in New York, the treasure transited through a Swiss collector named George Zakos. In the 1960s, he was behind most of the Greek and Turkish antiques that made it to the Western world.
Then you also need a country which legislation is quite convenient for smuggling. So you should take the artifacts to that country, and you should export these artifacts to the destination country from that one in order to create a history for the object.
When we are talking about so important object, we should have also some story of the object. The object cannot pop up in the market from nothing, from the dark without an origin.
So in the official documents, you don't see the name of Turkey. Of course, you don't see the name of Greece or whatever country. You just see, let's say, Switzerland.
If the object appears from nothing, something can be wrong in the process.
So that's why we are really talking about at the village part. It may not be that organized, but looking at the whole picture, it's organized. So you call the friend call the other friend take it to the other country, the other country sends it to the destination country. This is how it happens.
Thanks to testimonies from the raiders, Ozgen Akar had precise descriptions of the objects found in the tombs. He also had information about the treasure's buyers. John Jacob Klejman's gallery was located exactly 500 meters from the Metropolitan Museum of Art at 980 Madison Avenue. The net was closing in on the New York Museum. Ozgen no longer had any doubts. It was highly likely that the treasure hidden in the Met's storage facilities was indeed the Lydian Hoard. The coup de grace came in May 1974.
The Metropolitan released a catalog. One day I went there and took 10 copies of that catalog.
By 1970s, they took 5 of the objects for the exhibit, but the labels were not clear enough. It was like East Greek, something like that.
In the catalog, they had written East Greek beneath the pieces as a cover for their exhibition.
I guess they tried to test the waters then.
And why they called it the East Greek treasure rather than the Lydian Hoard was because they wanted to deflect the fact that it indeed came out of Turkey.
They wrote East Greek for the exhibition because they knew, where's Eastern Greece? It's Anatolia.
They knew that since the beginning.
After multiple back and forths between Uşak and New York, the Turkish journalist finally had all the proof he needed. It was now up to the Turkish government.
It was time to go after the museum, and the Turkish government decided to do it. The case went to the New York Federal Court.
The catalog proved that the Lydian Hoard was there. A description below the photos described it as a gift from John Klejman. But the museum had actually purchased the treasure from Klejman for $1.7 million.
Met essentially ignored Turkey's efforts, and they didn't give any information, they didn't cooperate, they denied, they said that it's from somewhere else, whatever.
The Met said that wasn't how they'd bought it. They claimed that they'd bought it legally for $2 million. They disputed the allegations, saying that it didn't come from an illegal excavation, that it had an origin, proper paperwork, etc.
Turkey made a last attempt to the Metropolitan Museum, telling that, okay, here are my proofs. And this is crystal clear that these objects are stolen from Turkey.
If the Turkish authorities, the proper ones, can prove that this material came out of Turkey, they can have it back. We'll just have to swallow the amount of money that we paid for it, and that's it. That's the right thing to do. When I left, retired from the Metropolitan Museum of Art, they changed the entire ball game, and they began to resist talking to the Turkish authorities, and then hired lawyers and all of that.
All of these legal and practical evidence put in front of Met, and Met refused again. As they refused, this time Turkish government took a serious decision.
In 1987, with permission from the Turkish minister, Turkey sued the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The trial took 7 years and cost Turkey $25 million. But the Turks wanted the treasure returned to its homeland at all costs.
The process ended in 1993 with a settlement. Because, you know, in the US, the process is really expensive. So Turkey, once Met agreed to return all of the objects, didn't want to risk it anymore. And for the sake of public benefit also, Turkey accepted the settlement proposal and returned 363 pieces.
When we were trying to come to an agreement, they showed us their storage facilities. They contained even more artifacts from the same period, but we couldn't do anything about those works.
It was a triumphant moment for Turkey and for Ozgen Akar. The treasure was finally coming home.
It took me 28 years. 28 years.
I had a dream when I started my mission at the museum. It was to personally bring back those works of art and ensure they got back to Uşak. Some 30 years later, by a marvelous coincidence, the treasure returned to Uşak on February 14th, 1996, Valentine's Day. They came home because of what we did. That day was the best day of my life. It's something I will never forget.
That's all the stuff we took.
After the trial, Turkey set up several operations to retrieve antique works that had been illegally purchased by Western museums. The Lydian Hoard was returned in 1995 and housed in Kazim Akbikoglu's museum in Uşak. He had gone all out to stop illegal tomb raiding in the region. There were 363 pieces on exhibition, including the treasure's centerpiece, the Hippocampus brooch. The priceless piece is made of solid gold and over 2,600 years old. This sumptuous work, featuring a winged horse with the fishtail, became the city's emblem.
Hippocampi are mythical creatures, imaginary creatures that can travel anywhere in the world, by air, by water, or by land. This brooch is unique. That fantastic creation is made of gold. It's an exceptionally distinct piece of artistry. It represents a major ancient artifact. It's one of the smallest pieces of the Lydian Hoard, but it has an enormous artistic and mythological significance. From that standpoint, it's truly priceless.
But 10 years later, a phone call triggered a major scandal. The objects on display at the museum were the fame of the small city and the pride of the inhabitants. In 2005, a local archaeologist received strange information from a nearby museum.
And the director of the Muğla Museum told her that there is a person who brought me a golden hippocamp. It is the identical one of the one that you returned from Met in your museum. Then she said, well, it's just impossible because this hippocampus brooch is unique and we don't know another example of it. So the one which that person brought to your museum should be a fake.
One day I was giving a presentation somewhere and a woman sat down in the first row, a beautiful woman with a low-cut top, and she was wearing the hippocampus brooch. I thought to myself, how can that woman be wearing the brooch?
The one-of-a-kind hippocampus brooch started appearing in multiple locations around Turkey. It made no sense. The young archaeologist went to the museum in Uşak looking for answers.
Then she realized that the video camera was not there anymore. The trace of the camera was there, but it was deinstalled, it was taken out.
Obviously, since it was a small museum, it had been built on a very low budget. The video surveillance system, the display cases, and the windows were obsolete and not up to modern-day standards.
The museum was in bad shape. I even wrote an article about it. There were several pieces outside in the garden without any security. They had no protection from the elements, and they could have been stolen by anyone from the outside.
There were tombstones simply piled on top of each other outside in the garden, not even on display. The museum's infrastructure was in terrible shape.
Very few people came to visit the museum in Uşak, less than 800 people in the past 5 years, which is what the Metropolitan Museum of Art gets in a single hour. The authorities sent specialists to the museum to try and understand what could have happened, but the brooch was still there, behind the glass.
Museum experts and one inspector were sent to the museum as a raid. But they opened the case and she takes the object, she looks at it. At the moment, she understands that it's like a piece of bijouterie.
Expert analysis revealed that the brooch on display in the museum was a fake.
This is the fake brooch, and that's the original one. They discovered 9 differences between the counterfeit and the original.
Most of the differences can't be seen with the naked eye. The most significant one between the original and the counterfeit Hippocampus brooch is the weight.
There's no difference in the color or in the metal used. The counterfeit one is also made of gold, but the weights are not the same, in addition to specific artistic details that don't match.
If you didn't know it had been stolen, you would never guess that you were looking at a counterfeit.
A counterfeit was on display instead of the original.
The original had been made in a silicone mold so they could make a copy of it, but the mold wasn't quite right.
Turkey was embarrassed. How could this have happened? How long had the counterfeit brooch been on display? And what happened to the original one?
It was a difficult situation because you returned a very famous and very valuable hoard and you are missing a piece of it. Other institutions, I mean, Met would say for several years that countries like Turkey, they cannot take care of the cultural heritage, they are not good at it. On the top of everything, losing the Hippocampus brooch was not something that we fancy, of course.
Omer Erbil, a journalist at the Hurriyet Daily News, took on the case and headed to Uşak. This mystery needed solving and fast.
This was a huge story for me, so I tried to set up an interview with Kazim, the museum director, but they told me he wasn't there. When I asked where he was, they said he had gone to Güre, the place where the pieces had originally been stolen. I set out to meet Kazim. As soon as he saw me, his facial expression changed. You recognize these types of things as a journalist. I approached him and said, "I'm sorry about the theft. How did it happen? How is it possible? How could the brooch have been stolen?" The museum director from Uşak told me that either the object from the United States was a fake, or it had been incorrectly weighed. That was his theory.
Kazim was in shock. He was grasping at straws. If the Met had returned a counterfeit, it was a huge deal. Or was it an inside job at the Uşak Museum?
Even if security wasn't great, without someone on the inside, it would have been impossible to steal it without getting caught. Anyone stealing would have been seen.
There's no other possibility. It's inconceivable that someone from the outside came in and exchanged the piece. That's impossible.
But who could have swapped the brooch? The director? Impossible. Kazim had fought by Ozgen's side for almost a dozen years to bring the treasure back to its homeland.
Kazim was a brother, a friend, a well-intentioned man. He was a good man.
Everyone joins on that one point, which is he was the most kindest person that they have ever met. He was the most hardworking person that they have ever met. So he was like a hero, I would say.
If I've only known 3 honest men in my life, one of them is Kazim.
He was a good museologist, a good archaeologist. So how did he get involved? That was the real question.
The investigation pointed to Kazim, but he continued to deny being involved. He claimed there had been a flaw in the treasure's restitution process from the United States. The pieces had been stored in sealed containers, but Kazim hadn't been authorized to inspect them. A few months later, Istanbul police got word of an illegal antique transaction taking place in the Grand Bazaar of Istanbul.
The police didn't know what piece was involved. The only thing they knew was that a group of people from Uşak were in Istanbul trying to sell something from a museum. When Istanbul police learned about it, they informed the city of Uşak. That's when they started tapping Kazim Abikoglu's phone.
Ömer's investigation and the wiretapping by the police shone a light on a totally hidden part of Kazim's life. It seemed a curse had fallen upon him. His wife cheated on him with the mayor of Uşak. The two lovers were then in a deadly car accident, and only Kazim's two children, who were in the back seat, survived. Kazim was traumatized and began to spin into a dark, downward spiral.
He would go out at night and gamble.
To such an extent that he'd show up drunk at the museum.
He rented an apartment across the street from the museum and began a second life. He had prostitutes at that place.
In addition to alcohol, he became a gambling addict, something for which he'd never had an interest. He just lost control.
Kazım Akbıyıkoğlu was in debt. This was the whole reason of everything, and he was being threatened with his family.
Then they started pressuring Kazim. They threatened him. He received death threats.
They got him into debt, and then, little by little, they started asking for artworks to pay off his debts.
Kazim had no choice, so he agreed. He told them there was a large tombstone next to the door in the museum's garden. He told them to take it at night, so it would look like it was stolen.
But that wasn't enough. They wanted something more valuable. The thugs set their sights on the golden Hippocampus brooch. It was small, easy to steal, and could sell for a lot on the antique black market.
Kazim refused. He said it was too obvious. He suggested that they make a counterfeit replica.
They were able to prove he tampered with the showcases and the video surveillance system.
Uşak is renowned for its jewelry makers. Kazim took advantage of his connections and had a mold of the Hippocampus brooch made so he could replicate it.
The copy was not a poor imitation. There was just a 2.5 gram difference in weight. Small differences that only an expert would be able to spot.
That's how copies of the brooch began to appear all over the country.
Here, I have the winged hippocampus with me.
He took it to a local, I would say, gang, who would be the ones to sell it and turn it into money and also pay to Kazim. But when he went to the hotel to give the brooch to that gang, they beat him. And they took the brooch.
Kazim got caught up in his own game. The brooch was in criminal hands, and they brought it to Istanbul to try to sell it.
A mafia-type organization, they cut the waist of that gang members and they took the brooch. So there was a police raid in the hotel. It was nothing and nobody could find anything.
The original brooch disappeared from that Istanbul hotel. The counterfeit was placed in the museum's showcase, and Kazim lost everything.
He said he wasn't the one who stole it. He admitted to all the rest with the band of thugs, so he was implicated in the crime. But he insisted he wasn't the one who'd stolen it from the museum.
People then still had some doubts. No, he wouldn't do it. No, Kazim, it's just impossible.
Özgen Akar didn't believe it for quite some time. He was angry at me.
I stand by what I said earlier. He's one of the 3 most honest men I've ever known in my life.
And this was the general tendency also in the ministry.
This is from February 16th, 2009. Here's the museum director. Kazim was sentenced to 12.5 years in prison. He was found guilty of embezzlement. He was also sentenced to 6 years for trafficking historical property. In total, he was sentenced to 18 years in prison. Here's another local paper from Uşak. This one claims it was Croesus' curse.
Karun'un laneti çarptı diyor.
Bana Güre'de şöyle bir şey demişti.
In Göre, Kazim had told me that something bad had happened to everyone who had raided the tumulus. A lot of people had told him to stop getting involved with the tumuli, the excavations, and Croesus. That something bad would end up happening to him as well. Kazim didn't believe it, but look at him now. He used to say he was in too deep.
It's worth noting that 5 of the 6 people involved in the original theft of the Lydian Hoard didn't die a normal death. And when Kazim Akbikoglu was arrested and sent to prison, he said that Croesus' curse had befallen him. All of that helped make it legendary.
Curse or no curse, Kazim was found guilty. He fell ill and was granted conditional release after 11 years in prison. He died a few months later in his home in October 2017. By the time he was imprisoned, the original brooch still hadn't been found.
The Republic of Turkey, Foreign Affairs, the police, and the Ministry of Culture had obviously sent Interpol photos and information about the piece. Interpol was looking for it all over the world.
We have 194 member countries in our network, but not in all our member countries. We have a specialized police unit with a national database dedicated to record stolen objects of art and connected to the Interpol one.
All of the police agencies of these states are being informed. And we also put it in the most wanted objects list of Interpol. So the Hippocampus brooch for a very long time was on the top of that list.
In 2010, Interpol revealed it might be in Germany, where they had been tracking a businessman for several months.
First, I heard it was in Bulgaria, so I went there. I went from Istanbul to Sofia, but I didn't find anything. Later, I heard it had been sent to Vienna via Bulgaria, before ending up in Germany.
During the period, most of the notifications we received were linked to Germany.
Having those objects on Interpol's key list of missing items made it difficult for traffickers and buyers alike.
Many articles were written about this. Everyone was talking about it. It was sensational, so no collector wanted to buy that piece.
In November 2012, the suspect gave the Hippocampus brooch to his lawyer, who turned it in to the German police. Pressure from Interpol and Turkey had chased away any potential buyers for the brooch.
So one day, it was around 5 p.m. I received a call from a colleague from Turkish Interpol. He was so excited. And I asked him what's happening, and he told me, Zeynep, we did it. I said, so we are talking about the same thing. The Hippocampus brooch. He said, yes, we found it.
Turkish experts were sent on site to analyze the brooch, and they confirmed its authenticity. The Hippocampus brooch returned to Uşak in March 2013. The treasure was once again complete. To protect it and put this sordid mess behind them, Turkey decided to build a new museum.
The original winged Hippocampus brooch came to our museum in September 2018, and we now have it on display.
Illicit trafficking of cultural objects is still a big problem despite all of the efforts of the governments.
It's a serious crime also because it's considered also as a financing of terrorism.
Global trafficking in works of art generates billions in the shadows. After drugs and weapons, it's the most lucrative source of illegal funds in the world. But over the past 50 years, the fight against these illegal sales has continued to evolve.
2019 were reported more than 12,700 crimes, and consequently more than 56,000 objects were stolen. But this is not the all important number. Another important number is in 2019, more than 1 million of objects were recovered.
The treasure's return was a significant landmark in the fight against illegal antique trafficking. After being plundered from the tomb in the 1960s and the theft of the brooch 40 years later, all 363 pieces of the Lydian hoard are once again in their homeland of ancient Lydia, Croesus's kingdom.